Zodiac. Epigraph. A city in the crosshairs. San Francisco fog is like a pencil note, easy to smudge, hard to erase. At night it turns into paper and someone draws a bold crosshair on it, then tapes it to the windows of newspaper offices. A city used to earthquakes and protests suddenly learns a different jolt. A phone booth ringing, a line hissing, a stranger's breath, and a voice that speaks as if reading the rules of his own game. It's me. Part 1. The Map of Fear. He didn't step from alleys. He came in envelopes. In blocks of cipher, in neat cartographer's arrows, in circles inked onto bay maps where Benicia sits to the north, Vallejo to the east, and farther out Lake Berryessa shivers with reeds and the rustle of oak leaves. He loved combinatorics, letters, dates, symbols, loved the feeling of police breathing down his neck and, on the inhale, hearing only their own fear. Part 2. Chronology. Night as a warehouse of evidence. Not just dates, scenes. They smell of gasoline, wet earth, printer's ink, and cold gunmetal. December 20th, 1968. Lake Herman Road, Benicia. The road winds among fields and pastures. A car with 2 teenagers idles at the shoulder-dry night. Low stars. Another car stops behind them. A car door thuds. A few steps on gravel, and the first shot cracks like river ice. An attack of surprise, short, hard, wordless. Few traces, but enough to understand. The killer is no thief, no jealous rival. This is hunting for the sake of the hunt. July 4th, 1969. Blue Rock Springs, Vallejo. The fireworks haven't cooled. A parking lot where only mosquitoes and distant private salutes are busy. A car eases up. Headlights flood the window. Drives away, then returns. A man approaches and fires almost point blank. Then, like a director calling for another take, comes back and fires again. 40 minutes later, someone phones the police from a nearby booth and calmly claims both attacks. The voice is even, a thread he'll use to stitch himself to the city. August 1st, 1969. The first letters. Envelopes arrive at the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, each sealed with a crosshair and a 408-symbol cryptogram. The demand is simple. Print this, or more will die. The ciphered text turns out not to be great evil literature, but a hunter's manifesto. I like killing because it is so much fun. In street language, he said, power belongs to whoever can force the papers to print him. The 408 will soon be solved, not by police but by a schoolteacher and his wife, aggravating the city's discomfort. The monster speaks to the public, and the public answers back. September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa. Saturday, warm, the water beaded with light. A couple lazes on the shore. A figure steps out from behind a hill in a black hood, a crosshair stitched on his chest. His voice is flat, like a commuter train announcement, talks about a prison escape, about a car, about money, and produces ropes. Hands tied neatly, almost carefully. Then the knife. On the car door he will scrawl, Vallejo 12 to 20 68 7469, Sep 2769 630, by knife. A catalogue of his evolution, from bullets to blade, from shadow to costume, from namelessness to brand. October 11th, 1969, Washington Cherry, San Francisco. A yellow taxi, the city's evening fever. A shot and the driver sags against the wheel. The killer wipes blood and carefully cuts a piece from the shirt, as if taking a ticket for his next letter. Passers-by in a patrol see a white male walking away into the neighborhood's heavy air. But the first radio description goes out like a curse. Suspect is a black male. A white man in his 30s or 40s is not stopped. A minute from the murder scene, a chance collapses like a taxi door. Later a letter arrives at the newsroom with the very scrap of cloth, the notarized seal of darkness. Later letters and phantom trails, 1970, 1974, and beyond. He will keep writing about a bomb for a school bus, a Halloween card with hints about a friend in the police, petty squabbles with a reporter, a sneer at the exorcist shifting tone from threats to sarcasm. Cases will be pulled under his umbrella. A student killing in Riverside, 1966. A nurse vanishing at State Line, 1970. Puzzling postcards. Some will convince detectives, others will remain peripheral. He feeds the myth, and the myth feeds him. Ciphers. Another theater. Beyond the 408 comes the trickier 340, solved decades later by a team of citizen sleuths. No name inside, only smugness and mockery. He'll mail slivers of code promising a signature and refuse to sign. The game matters more to him than the truth. Part 3. Why He Wasn't Caught. A comedy of errors and the limits of an era. Not an excuse for the police and X-ray of the late 60s, early 70s reality, where technology and bureaucracy were out of step, and the offender's ego hopscotched between them. 1. Split jurisdictions. Vallejo, Napa, Benicia, San Francisco. Different archives, leaders, egos. Where a single nervous system was needed, 4 hearts beat out of sync. Information moved like honey on cold glass. The offender moved quickly in print. 2. The taxi killer description error. The initial broadcast, suspect is a black male, became a fatal knot. A patrol glimpsed a white male near the scene and let him pass. Minutes after the murder, a window slammed shut. The mistake was admitted later, but time is the only currency you can't reimburse. 3. A child of the newspaper age. He understood how fear works when presses rule the night. By feeding letters and threats to editors, he forced them to be his megaphone. In return, police received thousands of tips from the public grains of truth, drowned in a beach of noise. 4. Costume changes. Different weapons, pistol, knife, different settings, lovers' lanes and a city corner, the hood at the lake. All this deliberately smeared the signature. Most serial predators are predictable. They love their routine. He delighted not in his routine, but in wrecking ours. 5. Dirty scenes, fragile evidence. A taxi is a city beehive, blood, fingerprints, crowds. The first minutes were not sterile onlookers, officers, medics. A print on the cab pillar might be his or someone else's from that crush of minutes. The age of DNA hadn't arrived. Envelopes were licked and handled by more than one person, mail clerks, secretaries, press staff. Contamination was baked in. 6. Copycats. When a name becomes a fear logo, a counterfeit market opens. Letters from the Zodiac poured in from anyone anxious teens, glory seekers, trolls. Sorting truth from theater burns even a good team down. 7. The limits of the time. No centralized ballistics network, no blanket of cameras, no software fusing multiple counties in seconds. Detectives pinned yarn to cork boards and hauled paper across bridges. He posted letters and watched the machine overheat. 8. A shadow, not a statue. Not the classic compulsive who snags on his ritual. He could freeze, write without killing, boast of other people's crimes. Not only committing offenses, he was constructing a legend, and legends outlive bodies. Part 4. Psychological profile. A man who writes with a knife. Age era. Likely a white male in his mid-20s to mid-40s at the height of the letters and estimate. Not a verdict. Disciplined enough to prep and revisit scenes. Young enough to enjoy risk. Type. Less an impulsive, explosion, psychopath. More a director narcissistic, status-hungry. His sadism isn't about lingering over pain. It's about control. He compels the city to read him, the police to answer him. He craves a name not his legal one, but the invented brand Zodiac. He builds a temple of ego with newsprint walls, intellect interests, a systemizer, ciphers, symbols, tidy diagrams of bombs. Not necessarily a college degree, could be a hands-on tech with a love for manuals and maps. Think someone who reads catalogs and schematics more than novels. Work where precision and template thinking matter. Print shop, mechanics, electronics, mapping, postal service, some artillery naval training hypotheses, not indictments. Behavioral markers. Monitors coverage of himself, responds with letters. Fetishizes date and place, leaves inscriptions, mails, proofs like a shirt scrap. Knows how to vanish and return. With victims he is clinical, procedural. Triggers feelings, envy of ordinary intimacy, parked couples, anger at authority figures, police, press, teachers, and a wish to sit above them. Likely streaks of humiliation in early life, mockery, social isolation, career stalls. He compensates with numbers and fear. Risk factors: ready access to weapons, a car, knowledge of the Bay's geography, a comfort with solitary night drives. Unfortunately, that describes thousands of men of the time, and that, too, is why he wasn't found. Part 5. Upbringing. The honest unknown. Who was he as a child? We have no reliable single biography, only spotlights thrown across different suspects. The profile, however, suggests a frame. Early perfectionism without praise. A teacher who never commended. A father who said, right is when it's error-free. A boy trained to reach for rules, not improvisation. Love of schematics. A garage radio, scale models, maps places where you can assemble a world and steer it with your fingers. Social awkwardness. Among peers a misfit, in letters a king. He finds a way to speak to the world with a microphone no one else can touch. This is not a general truth about all tinkerers. It's a portrait of his particular emptiness, the void he filled with a crosshair. Part 6. The victims. Names as resistance to oblivion. He wanted the talk to be about him. We can't tell this story without those whose lives he stole, or tried to. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, 1968. A first page torn from a novel. They weren't pieces on his board. They were teenagers loving a world that had just begun. Bullets can't erase that. Darlene Ferrin, Michael Mageau, 1969. She energetic, friendly. He survived, a living bearer of memory. The man who heard the killer's second approach and, bleeding, still described it. Survivors are a bone in a myth's throat. Cecelia Shepard, Bryan Hartnell, 1969, Lake Berryessa. She an artful student with her own horizon line. He alive to tell it, turning not just evidence, but a human account of a flat voice and a hot pain. The scroll on their car door is the boldest autograph of malice. Paul Stine, 1969. A cabbie working a Saturday night like thousands of others. His shirt became his posthumous letter because its cutout was mailed to a newsroom. That detail was a slap to the city. He could turn a person into a document. Other names and shadows. Kathleen Johns, who escaped a likely abduction. Sherry Joe Bates in Riverside, a debated link yet in his aura. Donna Lass, a missing nurse, more questions than answers. Important to repeat, not every crosshair is his, not every shadow is his step. Part 7. Ciphers. Paper knives. His ciphers aren't about revealing a legal name, they're about ruling the spotlight. The 408 fell quickly solved at a kitchen table. the world learning not a name but a claim about slaves in the afterlife hunt. The 340 yielded decades later, not to a lab, but to hobbyist persistence. The 13 and the 32 remained parables of promise and bait. He was less a mathematician than a showman. The ciphers are props, not locks. Part 8. Suspects. Faces around a void. Men ended up in his shadow, some for words, some for tastes, some for geography. Police checked and released. Newspapers chewed on names for years. Some died without a charge or a clean bill. Caution matters here. The public hunger for a name often outruns proof. Time and again, investigators have said, none of the candidates famous in the press is locked in by conclusive evidence, neither by prints nor DNA, nor ironclad overlaps. That's the black hole of this story. Light all around, nothing at the center. Part 9. What remains? Evidence and its fate. A shirt scrap, photocopies of letters, envelopes, the saliva on stamps. Whose exactly? The senders, a postal clerk's, a newsroom staffer's. Ballistics tying bullets to earlier scenes, fingerprints no one fully trusts. Later science brought DNA methods, and some were applied to his mail, but some isn't decisive. The absence of a clean profile isn't science's failure. It's the compound interest of those first minutes-crowded scenes. Early era handling. Part 10. Why this story sticks to culture. Because he left a role for us. For police, the hunter of a shadow. For newspapers, the mirror that cannot not reflect. For the reader, the codebreaker. For himself, the author who writes with a knife and edits by mail. In classic crime tales, evil is punished or evaporates facelessly. Here, evil talks and asks the audience to be its co-author. That's a rare, tormenting kind of legend. Part 11. If only. A careful reconstruction of missed chances. If only the taxi description had been correct from the first second. If only the counties had formed a single task force at once. If only scenes had been truly sterile. If only he hadn't been so adept at pauses and imitation. Each if only is not a key, just a faint scrape. Investigative failures rarely come in one blow. They grow from the sum of small, era-typical things. This isn't a manual for evasion. It's a receipt for modern methods. All the tactics we consider obvious today were bought at the price of what we couldn't do then. Part 12. A full-length portrait. Imagine a man who loves instructions more than people. His morning is a row of rituals order on the desk, a pen at a perfect right angle, a watch that never drifts. He knows how to reach the lake without traffic, where to park, so headlights cast no extra shadows. He keeps clippings bound with a rubber band, not out of pride, but to log his wins. At work, he's the kind of man whose name no one remembers, precise, effectless, indispensable, until a machine can do it. By evening, he turns director, envelope, emblem, cutouts, a quick audit of newsroom addresses. He speaks to the city like a professor to a massive lecture hall. But the exam always has one question. Who am I? And he forbids the correct answer. His fate is to live in myth longer than ordinary men live. His punishment is a myth, too. He never gets a legal name, and without a name there's no true fame. Only a shadow. Postscript. We look into the cipher. The cipher looks back. The Zodiac story isn't only about him. It's about us, whom we give a voice to, how we learn not to feed a monster the attention it demands, and how decades later we still search the squares of old letters for a hint of order. There won't be order. There will be responsibility. Remember the names, not the logo, the lessons, not the legend. In sum. His chronology is a chain of scenes from Benicia to San Francisco, from first letters to late postcards. Why he wasn't found, a braid of era limits, error, fragmented systems, and his showman's shape-shifting. His psychological portrait, a narcissistic director who writes with a knife and edits with a newspaper, a systemizer thirsting for control of attention. His childhood is unknown, but contours are likely. Isolation, love of instructions, lack of praise. His victims are not extras, they're the center of gravity. And the lesson is not to confuse a crosshair with power. Power is in staring at the cipher, without letting it tell us who we must become.